Welcome back, my dear literature enthusiasts. I can't tell you how much I appreciate sharing this little corner of thought and reflection with you all. Every time I sit down to create one of these explorations, I imagine we're gathered around a table stacked with books and mugs of tea, leaning in as the conversation drifts from novels to cinema to those strange, luminous spaces where stories reveal something essential about ourselves. Before we set out on today's journey, I'll just gently remind you, if you enjoy these kinds of thoughtful, meandering dives into the art of film, a like and a subscribe goes such a long way. Not for numbers or vanity, but so this little circle of ours can keep growing, so that more curious minds can join in. Today we'll be exploring Elio 2025. And let me be clear right from the beginning, this isn't a review in the conventional sense. You won't hear me grading performances or dissecting box office strategies. What I want to offer instead is something closer to what we might call a meditation, a deeply intellectual, theoretical, and critical analysis, the kind that literature lovers tend to cherish. It's not about judgment, but about connection, symbolism, and the beautiful, messy web of ideas that weave through this story. Think of it less like a critic's verdict, and more like a diary entry I've decided to share with friends. When I first encountered this film, it stirred something oddly familiar inside me. There are works of art that don't just entertain us, but seem to address us directly, like they've been listening to our private questions and responding in their own cryptic language. I've always felt slightly alien in the world, not in the dramatic sense of not belonging, but in the quieter sense of moving through life feeling like an observer. Maybe you know that feeling too, watching others laugh at jokes that don't quite land for you, standing at the edges of groups, fascinated but also slightly apart. The story at the heart of this film seems to take that sensation and magnify it, turning it into an epic allegory. It made me remember being a child, lying in the grass, staring at the night sky and thinking, if the stars could speak, what would they say? And would they even understand me? The film introduces us to a boy whose life is turned upside down when he is mistaken for something far larger than himself. Suddenly, he is thrust into a role he never asked for, carrying the weight of representation, responsibility, and the unspoken expectation to explain humanity to those who are not human at all. And as wild as that premise sounds, isn't it just a grand cosmic echo of what we all go through? So many of us spend our lives being misread, mislabeled, or thrust into roles we didn't choose: child, parent, leader, outsider. We become symbols before we are ready, and the struggle becomes not just to survive, but to make meaning out of what we've been handed. The overview of the film itself is deceptively simple. A boy, one day ordinary, the next caught in an interstellar misunderstanding, becomes the ambassador of Earth to an alien council. But beneath that plot summary lies a tangle of questions. What does it mean to represent not just yourself, but an entire species? How does one child's voice carry the echo of billions of others, each with their contradictions, flaws, and dreams? And perhaps the most intriguing question: what happens when the cosmos expects clarity, but all you have to offer is confusion? The film doesn't shy away from wonder. In fact, it embraces it, wrapping us in visual grandeur and moments of quiet intimacy that feel almost literary in their construction. There's a sequence early on where our young protagonist looks at his reflection, not in a mirror, but in the polished surface of an alien artifact. His face is warped, doubled, almost unrecognizable. That image lingered with me because it seemed to encapsulate the theme of identity, how we so often see distorted versions of ourselves, especially when others are projecting their expectations onto us. I thought about my own adolescence, about the times I felt like I was playing a part in a script written by others, desperately trying to find the lines that belonged to me. And then, of course, there is the plot itself, which moves like a dance between spectacle and introspection. The first act grounds us in the everyday, with scenes that sketch the outlines of an ordinary boy's world. Schoolyard embarrassments, quiet afternoons at home, the kind of moments so small they might be overlooked if not for how tenderly they're shown. And then, almost abruptly, the story pivots. The boy is chosen, or rather mistaken, for something greater, and suddenly the canvas explodes outward into the vastness of space. What struck me most was not the grandeur of the new setting, but how small the boy seemed within it. That smallness felt honest. Too often, stories give us children who rise seamlessly to the occasion, but here the boy's awkwardness, his uncertainty, his sheer humanness remain front and center. As the narrative unfolds, we're treated to a series of encounters that blur the line between comedy and philosophy. Aliens who bicker like bureaucrats, questions posed in riddles that seem impossible to answer, moments where silence says more than words. Each scene adds another layer, not just to the story, but to the boy's internal journey. He begins as someone who can barely articulate his own feelings, yet he's asked to articulate the essence of humanity. Watching him stumble, guess, and sometimes accidentally reveal profound truths reminded me of how often we all do the same. We fumble through life, saying things half by accident, yet sometimes those slips carry more honesty than the speeches we rehearse. Without spoiling too much, I will say that the story's key twists aren't just about what happens to the boy, but about what he learns about himself. There's a pivotal moment later on where he realizes that the council of beings he's speaking to isn't necessarily judging Earth. They're judging him. His answers, his mistakes, his silences are not just being recorded as an individual performance, but as a reflection of an entire species. That realization is crushing, but also liberating. Isn't that what we all fear? That others will judge humanity by the fragment they see in us? And isn't that also what makes every small act of kindness so powerful? That it might ripple outward as a representation of something larger than ourselves? The film teases these questions beautifully, leaving us dangling between awe and unease. We get glimpses of cosmic truths, but never the whole picture. There are hints of political intrigue within the alien council, suggestions that perhaps the misunderstanding wasn't so accidental after all, and even moments that suggest the boy's selection was less about mistake and more about fate. These threads pull us deeper, keeping us suspended between clarity and mystery. But for me, the most compelling twist isn't about the external plot at all. It's the internal realization that the boy comes to, that he doesn't have to be perfect to represent humanity. He doesn't have to have all the answers. He simply has to be honest. There's something profoundly moving in that. The idea that imperfection, vulnerability, and even confusion are not weaknesses, but truths. Watching that realization unfold, I thought about how often I've hidden my own. Confusion in the hope of appearing strong, only to realize later that honesty would have carried me further. What this story whispers, beneath all the spectacle, is that sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply to show up as you are. To say, I don't know, when you don't know. To admit fear when you are afraid. To let others see the cracks, the uncertainty, the very things we often try hardest to conceal. In doing so, we not only find connection, but perhaps reveal something more universal than perfection ever could. And that is why this film feels so personal to me. Because like so many of you, I've spent my life both longing to be understood and fearing that I never truly will be. This story takes that longing, that fear, and spins it into a tapestry of stars, aliens, and cosmic councils. But at its heart, it's still about one boy, standing on the edge of a vast unknown, trying to say something true. The story begins in the smallest of moments, the kind you almost wouldn't notice if you weren't paying attention. A boy sits in a classroom, lost not in the lesson before him, but in the quiet labyrinth of his own thoughts. Around him, other children whisper, laugh, raise their hands with the confidence of people who feel their voices belong. He, on the other hand, draws absent-minded spirals on the edge of his notebook, occasionally glancing up, as if trying to tether himself to the rhythm of the room. That opening spoke to me in a way I can hardly describe. I remember being that child, never quite in step, watching the world perform a dance I didn't know the steps to. And the film captures that subtle dissonance beautifully, without judgment, without pity, simply as truth. What we come to realize very quickly is that the boy is not just shy, but marked by a different kind of awareness. His imagination seems to pulse louder than reality. When his teacher asks him a question he wasn't prepared for, he answers not with facts, but with something closer to poetry, and the class erupts in laughter. He flushes, embarrassed, but there is something luminous in that moment. The words he speaks are strange, yet strangely resonant, like fragments of a language no one else can hear. That moment stays with us, because it feels like foreshadowing, a reminder that sometimes the things that make us wrong, in one context, become the very things that save us in another. At home, his world is quieter. His mother is loving but distracted, burdened by the weight of her own responsibilities. The house is filled with half-finished projects, dishes left unwashed, bills tucked away in corners, as though life itself has grown too heavy to keep tidy. And yet, within this imperfect home lies a sense of warmth, a resilience that is not polished but real. Watching those scenes, I thought of my own childhood home, where things weren't always neat or orderly, but where love stitched the rough edges together. It reminded me that cinema doesn't have to show us glossy perfection. Sometimes the truest reflection is in the mess. It is during one of those ordinary evenings that the extraordinary first announces itself. The boy, sitting alone, catches a flicker of light outside the window. At first, he assumes it's nothing more than a passing car, or maybe the trick of a tired mind. But then the light pulses again, in a rhythm too deliberate to be accidental. He steps outside, barefoot, the cool ground pressing against his feet, and stares up at the night sky. And there it is, something vast, silent, and unmistakably other. This sequence is not rushed. The camera lingers on his face, allowing us to feel both his fear and his wonder. He doesn't scream. He doesn't run. Instead, he whispers something under his breath, something only he and the night hear. That reaction is telling. Where another might recoil, he leans in. Where another might dismiss, he listens. That openness becomes the hinge upon which the entire story swings. The following day, the world begins to shift. Rumors ripple through the community. Strange lights, odd sounds, a disturbance no one can quite explain. Adults wave it off with half-hearted jokes about weather balloons or military experiments. But the boy knows better. He felt it. It wasn't just a light in the sky, it was a call. And though he cannot say why, he knows it was directed at him. Soon after, the misunderstanding occurs, the one that propels everything forward. A cosmic council, vast and ancient, has somehow mistaken this boy for Earth's chosen representative. The absurdity of it all is part of the story's brilliance. How could a child, awkward and uncertain, possibly be the voice of humanity? And yet, in a way, isn't that the most honest choice? Who better to embody the raw, unpolished truth of what it means to be human than someone who has not yet mastered the masks adults wear? The revelation comes suddenly. One moment he is in his home, enduring the familiar rhythms of daily life, and the next he is swept away, taken not by force, but by something gentler, almost ceremonial. He finds himself standing before beings so unlike anything he has known that words fail him. Their shapes defy logic, shifting and shimmering, more suggestion than solid form. Their voices are not spoken but felt, vibrating through him like the resonance of a deep chord. And in that moment, he realizes they expect him to speak for all of humanity. The irony is crushing. He can barely speak for himself, let alone for billions of others. Yet here he is, placed at the center of a stage he never auditioned for. Watching him fumble, trying to string together words that feel both honest and sufficient, I felt a pang of recognition. How many times have I been asked to represent something I barely understand myself? To stand as a proxy for a group, a culture, an identity, when all I wanted was the freedom to simply be me. This moment is both fantastical and deeply relatable, a mirror held up to the quiet burdens we often carry. The council listens, inscrutable. Some seem amused, others skeptical, still others quietly sympathetic. There is a tension in the air, as though the boy's every hesitation, every stammer, is being weighed on scales we cannot see. And yet, somehow, he stumbles into truths. In his awkwardness, he blurts out observations that, while unpolished, cut to the core. When asked to describe humanity, he does not offer lofty ideals or grand declarations. Instead, he says something simple, almost childlike. We're scared most of the time, but we still try. That line hit me harder than I expected. Because isn't that the essence of it? We dress ourselves up in pride, ambition, and progress. But beneath it all, aren't we just creatures fumbling in the dark, driven by fear, yet stubborn enough to keep moving forward? His words, in their unintentional honesty, capture something no polished speech ever could. The film doesn't present this as a triumphant victory. The boy is not suddenly lauded as wise or eloquent. Instead, his words hang in the air, unsettling, unresolved. The council murmurs among themselves, and he is left uncertain whether he has passed some invisible test or failed spectacularly. That uncertainty feels deliberate, a reflection of how little clarity life often offers us. As the story progresses, we see him confronted with challenges that force him to grow in ways he never imagined. He is asked to mediate disputes among beings whose logic defies his own. He is tested with questions that seem unanswerable, riddles that probe not just for knowledge, but for perspective. And time and again, he falters, hesitates, admits ignorance. Yet strangely, those very admissions seem to resonate more than the times he tries to fabricate answers. The council does not seem to want perfection, they want honesty. Meanwhile, back on Earth, his absence has not gone unnoticed. His mother, bewildered and desperate, searches for answers, encountering only silence and disbelief. These intercut scenes ground the story, reminding us of the human cost behind the cosmic stage. Watching her struggle, I thought of the sacrifices parents make, often unseen, often unacknowledged. Her worry is not just about losing her son, but about losing the fragile sense of stability she has managed to build. The tension rises as the boy begins to realize that his presence among the council is not just ceremonial. His words, his decisions carry weight. The council is not merely observing him. They are testing whether humanity itself deserves inclusion in their vast network of civilizations. The stakes, once abstract, now sharpen into clarity. One child's faltering voice could alter the fate of an entire species. And yet, the beauty of this story lies not in the grandeur of that premise, but in the intimacy of its execution. We see not a hero rising to the occasion, but a boy grappling with the same insecurities, doubts, and longings we all carry. The grandeur of space is balanced by the smallness of his humanity, and it is in that smallness that the story finds its truth. By the midpoint of the story, the boy has not transformed into a polished ambassador. He is still awkward, still uncertain, still prone to blurting out half-formed thoughts. But what has shifted is his awareness. He begins to understand that perhaps his role is not to speak for humanity, but to be humanity, flawed, vulnerable, and searching. And that realization, though subtle, marks a turning point. As I watched this unfold, I couldn't help but reflect on my own life. The moments I felt unprepared for the roles handed to me, the times I stumbled into truths I hadn't intended to speak, the quiet weight of being seen not just as myself, but as a stand-in for something larger. And I realized, perhaps that is what this story is trying to tell us, that we don't need to have all the answers. Sometimes, it is enough to show up honestly, even in our uncertainty. And so, the boy continues, caught between worlds, child and ambassador, individual and symbol, terrified and brave all at once. The questions grow larger, the expectations heavier, and the line between his own identity and the fate of his species begins to blur. The story reaches a place where the air itself feels heavier, charged with expectation. The boy, still small in stature, still trembling inside even when he tries to stand taller, finds himself staring into the eyes, or the approximation of eyes, of beings whose judgment feels absolute. Up to this point, he has stumbled through moments with an unintentional grace, his honesty piercing through in ways he didn't fully understand. But now, the weight of what is at stake begins to settle on him. His every word feels like it could tip the balance, like one misplaced phrase might condemn, not just himself, but everyone he has ever known. And yet, here is where the film becomes something more than just spectacle. Rather than presenting a straightforward rise to confidence, it gives us tension and fragility. There's a council meeting unlike any before, where the boy is asked to decide on a matter so incomprehensible it borders on impossible. How to resolve a dispute between two civilizations who see existence through completely different lenses. One views time as circular, repeating endlessly. The other views it as linear, always moving forward. To them, this is not philosophy. It is survival, the foundation of how they live, love, and fight. How could a child answer such a question? He doesn't. Not at first. He panics. He admits, through tears, that he doesn't understand, that he is just a kid. For a long, agonizing moment, silence follows. The council stirs uneasily, and we fear it is over, that his vulnerability has undone him. But then something remarkable happens. Instead of rejecting him, they lean in. They ask him, gently, what he believes. Not what humanity believes, not what Earth has written in books or painted in stories. Just him. His heart. This is the pivot point. He closes his eyes, searching for words that don't come easily. Finally, he whispers, maybe it's both. Maybe things come back around, but not the same. Like the seasons. Like when someone leaves, and you think you'll never see them again, but then something reminds you of them, and it feels like they're here. Maybe time isn't a line or a circle. Maybe it's a spiral. I remember the shiver that line sent down my spine. It wasn't polished. It wasn't scientific. But it was profoundly human. It came from grief, from longing, from the ache of someone who has lost and still remembers. And in that moment, his words do not solve the dispute neatly. They don't magically erase centuries of difference. But they open a door. They offer a bridge where before there was only division. The council responds not with thunderous applause, but with quiet acknowledgement. They see in him not mastery, but possibility. And that is enough to move things forward. As the story deepens, we begin to see cracks within the council itself. Not all agree on the boy's presence. Some argue he is too young, too ignorant, too unstable to carry the weight of representation. Others defend him, suggesting that his imperfection might be exactly what makes him suitable, that a species so defined by contradictions cannot be spoken for by perfection. This internal conflict among the council members mirrors the boy's own internal struggle. He feels it, even when they try to keep it hidden, and it pushes him toward his most difficult choice yet. The climax builds slowly, with tension braided into every scene. A shadow emerges, not an external villain in the traditional sense, but a faction within the council who believe Earth is a threat. To them, humanity is reckless, violent, prone to destruction. They question whether such a species deserves inclusion, or even survival. Their arguments are damning, and the film doesn't shy away from truth. Images flash: wars, pollution, cruelty, all the evidence against us. The boy, forced to watch, feels crushed beneath the shame of it. And here comes the most devastating twist. The council reveals they did not choose him by mistake. They chose him because they wanted someone who embodied humanity's fractures, not its strengths. His awkwardness, his loneliness, his struggle to belong. These were not errors, but signals. To the council, he is not an accident. He is a test, a mirror. The revelation is almost unbearable. For a moment, he feels betrayed. Everything he thought was coincidence now feels like manipulation. And in his anger, he nearly walks away. But then something shifts. He remembers his mother, the way she keeps going even when everything feels like too much. He remembers the teacher who laughed at his strange answer, and the class that laughed too, and how even in that humiliation there was still a flicker of truth. He remembers standing barefoot in the grass, looking up at a sky too big for him, and feeling wonder instead of fear. And suddenly he understands. They didn't choose him to be perfect. They chose him because perfection isn't real. They chose him because he is afraid, and he tries anyway. Because he fails, and he keeps going. Because he doesn't have the answers, but he still listens. The final confrontation unfolds not in battle, but in words. The boy stands before the council and admits everything. That humanity is flawed, that we destroy as much as we create, that we hurt each other even when we mean to love. But then he adds something else, something that feels like the very heartbeat of the film. We're broken, but we want to be better. And maybe that's enough. It is not a speech of triumph. It is halting, raw, full of pauses and cracks in his voice. But it is true. And truth, in that moment, carries more weight than any polished argument could. The council deliberates. The tension stretches unbearably long. Finally, the decision comes. Humanity will not be destroyed, nor fully embraced. Instead, they will be given a chance, a fragile, conditional invitation to prove themselves. The resolution is bittersweet. The boy is returned to Earth, not as a hero showered in glory, but as a child who has seen too much and carries it quietly inside him. His mother embraces him, overwhelmed with relief, but she does not know the full extent of what he has endured. How could she? He doesn't tell her everything. Some experiences live too deep for words. And yet there is hope. In his eyes, we see a new awareness, a new courage. He is still the same boy who doodles in notebooks and stumbles over his words. But he is also something more now. Someone who has seen humanity reflected through alien eyes and still believes it is worth fighting for. That quiet conviction lingers long after the credits roll. What I love most about this ending is its refusal to offer easy answers. It doesn't declare humanity redeemed or condemned. It doesn't suggest the boy is suddenly whole or wise. Instead, it leaves us in that fragile, uncomfortable space between despair and hope. And isn't that where we live most of our lives? Not in certainty, but in the tension of becoming. As I left the theater, I couldn't stop thinking about the boy's words. That maybe it's not about being good or bad, worthy or unworthy, but about wanting to be better. That longing itself, flawed as it may be, is what defines us. And maybe, just maybe, it's what saves us too. When I think back on the story, what lingers with me more than any single twist or spectacular image is the people. Or perhaps, in this case, the personalities that filled its spaces with meaning. Characters in a tale like this are not just individuals. They are living metaphors, mirrors for our own selves, little fragments of humanity scattered across an alien backdrop. And to really sit with them, to trace their shapes and feel their resonance, is to understand not only the film, but also, in some quieter way, ourselves. The boy at the center, of course, carries the story's heart. He is small, awkward, hesitant, filled with the nervous energy of someone who has never been sure where he belongs. And yet, that is what makes him so achingly human. I saw pieces of myself in him. The way he trips over words, the way he sometimes hides behind humor or silence, the way he looks at the world with a mixture of wonder and fear. Watching him was like revisiting my own younger self, the one who sat in classrooms feeling invisible, the one who scribbled strange ideas in notebooks no one else ever read. What sets him apart, though, is his honesty. It is not the kind of shining, noble honesty of a hero in epic tales. His is fragile, unsteady, often blurted out in the wrong moment. He says what he feels because he doesn't know how to keep it inside. And that vulnerability, so often the very thing that isolates him, becomes, paradoxically, the very thing that connects him to others. I found myself rooting for him not because he was brave in the traditional sense, but because he was afraid and still showed up anyway. That is a rare kind of courage, and it lingers. Then there is his mother, a figure who does not dominate the story in screen time, but whose presence is like a constant hum beneath every scene. She is the anchor, the tether, the reminder of love in a world that otherwise feels too vast and alien. What struck me most about her was her resilience, the way she tries to hold everything together, often without recognition. In her, I saw echoes of so many women I have known, carrying burdens silently, making sacrifices that are invisible but essential. She is not flawless. She loses patience, she makes mistakes. But the film portrays her with such warmth that her imperfections feel not like failings, but like the texture of real life. And then, beyond Earth, the film opens its arms to an array of beings. Figures who are at once strange and familiar, alien in form, but deeply recognizable in spirit. The council members, for example, could have been written as cold archetypes, detached judges staring down from lofty thrones. But instead, they are complicated, full of internal divisions, disagreements, quiet doubts. Some are rigid, clinging to tradition and suspicion. Others are curious, willing to risk their own certainty in the hope of something new. Watching their debates unfold was like watching the different parts of a single mind argue with itself. Fear against hope, doubt against trust, suspicion against wonder. Among them, one particular figure stands out in my memory, the elder who listens more than he speaks. He sits quietly for much of the proceedings, letting the louder voices clash, but when he finally does speak, his words carry weight. There is a gentleness in him, a patience, almost like a teacher who knows the lesson cannot be forced, but must be discovered. He sees something in the boy, not a savior, but a reflection. I found myself gravitating toward him, because he reminded me of those rare mentors in life, the ones who guide not by commanding, but by noticing. Opposite him, of course, is the skeptic, the one who cannot see anything but danger in humanity. His arguments are sharp, damning, difficult to refute. And what I found fascinating was how the film gave him space to be right. He was not a cartoon villain, but someone who had looked at our species honestly and seen our violence, our greed, our waste. In his suspicion, there was truth, and that made him all the more haunting. He is the voice of despair, the embodiment of the fear that perhaps we are not redeemable. Watching him, I felt the discomfort of recognition. Haven't we all had that voice inside us, the one that doubts, that sees only the failures? And then, scattered throughout the alien world, there are smaller presences, companions, guides, beings who orbit the boy like fragments of possibility. Some are humorous, offering brief moments of levity. Others are enigmatic, speaking in riddles or gestures that leave us questioning. They may not dominate the story, but they add texture, reminding us that this universe is bigger than the council chamber. Each of them, in their own way, reflects a facet of the boy's journey. Fear, curiosity, playfulness, wisdom. Together, they form a constellation of perspectives, showing us that no one character can hold the whole truth. What struck me most, though, was how the characters were never isolated entities. They existed in relation to one another, like threads in a tapestry. The boy's honesty only mattered because the council was there to hear it. The mother's love only resonated because it contrasted with the council's cold formality. The skeptic's arguments only had weight because they pressed against the elder's patient openness. In this way, the film created a living dialogue, not just between characters, but between ideas, values, visions of what humanity could be. One of the more subtle yet powerful dynamics was the way silence functioned as a character in itself. There are moments when the boy says nothing, when the council looms in stillness, when the mother simply holds him without words. In those silences, meaning expands. I found myself holding my breath, waiting, feeling the weight of what was not said. That restraint is rare in modern cinema, and it made the characters feel more alive, more human, or, in the case of the aliens, more real. As I reflect on them now, I realize that the characters are less about individuals and more about archetypes refracted through a deeply personal lens. The boy is innocence and vulnerability. The mother is love and resilience. The elder is patience and wisdom. The skeptic is fear and despair. Together, they form a mosaic of what it means to exist, to doubt, to hope. And perhaps that is why they resonate so deeply. They are not just characters in a story. They are mirrors in which we catch glimpses of ourselves. There is a moment near the end, when the boy returns to Earth, and he sits quietly in his room, surrounded by familiar objects, posters, toys, the mess of everyday life. And yet, he is not the same. The character we met at the beginning, the awkward, uncertain child, still exists, but he has been changed by the weight of everything he has seen. That duality, the coexistence of innocence and experience, is perhaps the most profound character arc I have seen in a long while. It reminds me of those moments in life when we return home after something transformative, grief, love, loss, discovery, and the world looks the same, but we know we are not. And so, in the end, the characters of this film linger not as distant figures, but as companions in thought. They are with me as I walk through the world, as I wonder about humanity's flaws and hopes, as I wrestle with my own doubts and dreams. That, I think, is the mark of great storytelling. Not that it entertains us for a moment, but that it stays with us, reshaping the way we see ourselves and others. What has always fascinated me most about cinema is not only what ends up on screen, but the messy, mysterious, and sometimes downright bizarre realities that swirl behind the curtain. With this particular film, the strangeness seems to have multiplied, as if the story itself leaked into the world around it, bending chance, circumstance, and imagination into a patchwork of facts and half-truths. Some of these are whispers from the crew, others are little-known details buried in production notes, and some are the kinds of uncanny coincidences that you almost don't want to believe. And yet, strangeness has its own gravity, pulling us closer. One of the first oddities that caught my attention was the way the main role, our boy at the center of everything, was cast. By all accounts, he wasn't even meant to audition. He was simply accompanying a cousin, waiting in the lobby, fidgeting with his backpack straps, when one of the casting directors noticed him. They asked a few questions, curious about his restless energy. Within days, he was reading lines, and within weeks, he was confirmed for the lead. It feels almost fated, as though the story itself was choosing its vessel, plucking an unsuspecting child out of the crowd and dropping him into the heart of an interstellar narrative. It reminds me of those myths where heroes are chosen not by their strength or ambition, but by sheer chance, or perhaps by destiny disguised as chance. Then there was the matter of the sets. You would think, with a story so fantastical, everything would be done with green screens and computer magic. And yes, much of it was. But the production team, in a move that surprised even some of the actors, built enormous, physical spaces for key moments. The council chamber, for example, was not just a CGI dreamscape. It was a towering, cavernous set constructed on a soundstage, complete with shifting panels of light that mimicked starlight. Actors described walking onto that set as disorienting, like stepping into another dimension. One even fainted during the first rehearsal, overwhelmed by the scale and the strange acoustics of the space. They later joked about it, but there was something eerie in the way that environment seemed to swallow sound, making every word feel heavy with consequence. Stranger still was what happened during one of those shoots. The lights, programmed to shift slowly through alien hues, began flickering wildly without explanation. For half an hour, no technician could regain control. Purples bled into greens, blues into deep reds, faster and faster, until the actors were standing in a pulsing storm of light. Some swore it felt alive, like the set itself had become conscious. Eventually, the system reset on its own, as mysteriously as it had broken. To this day, no one has explained what caused it. For me, it almost feels like the film wanted to remind its creators that some things can't be entirely controlled, that art has a will of its own. Another peculiar detail lies in the costumes. At first glance, they appear typical for a sci-fi narrative: flowing fabrics, metallic accents, subtle nods to cultures both earthly and imagined. But what most viewers don't know is that many of these garments were hand-stitched with patterns inspired by obscure mathematical sequences. A designer, fascinated by the relationship between mathematics and nature, embedded fractals and Fibonacci spirals into the stitching. Most of it is invisible on screen, but if you pause and zoom in on certain frames, you can just make out the patterns curling in subtle, hypnotic designs. It was never necessary for the audience to see. The point, according to the designer, was to infuse the world with a logic deeper than appearances, a hidden order that mirrored the cosmos itself. To me, this is the kind of quiet madness that defines great filmmaking. The willingness to labor over details that may never be noticed, but that nonetheless enrich the atmosphere in ways we feel without fully perceiving. Perhaps the most humanly strange stories, though, come from the relationships among the cast and crew. There is one tale I adore. During a particularly grueling night shoot, when exhaustion was high and tempers were short, someone suggested they take a break and play a simple word game. What began as a few minutes of silliness turned into an hours-long bonding ritual. They invented elaborate rules, created running jokes, and, for the rest of production, carried that game with them, playing in between takes, in trailers, even in costume. The game itself wasn't remarkable, but what it did was bind the group together, turning a stressful, high-pressure environment into something more like a family. I like to imagine those alien worlds being conjured on screen, while, just off camera, laughter echoed through the set over some ridiculous made-up wordplay. Of course, not all strangeness was light-hearted. There were challenges that bordered on the surreal. For instance, one scene required water tanks to simulate a strange environment. The tanks were massive, filled and refilled countless times. And yet, on multiple occasions, the water developed an odd tint, sometimes a murky green, sometimes a shimmering silver sheen. Tests showed nothing dangerous, but no one could explain why it kept happening. Some crew members joked that the water had gone alien, that the story was seeping into the material world. It became a superstition. Whenever the water shimmered, they believed something extraordinary would happen in the shoot that day. Strangely enough, some of the most emotionally powerful takes did happen on those days. Then there's the matter of sound. Much of the alien dialogue was developed using experimental linguistic theories. Instead of simply stringing together nonsense syllables, the language department built actual grammar structures, complete with syntax and rules of pronunciation. Some of the actors became so fluent in this invented tongue that they started speaking it off-set, ordering coffee or greeting friends in a language no one else understood. There's even a rumor that one actor dreamt in that language during production, as though it had burrowed into their subconscious. That detail haunts me. How something fabricated for a film could begin to spill over into lived reality, shaping thought and dream. One of my favorite pieces of trivia involves the music. The composer, known for weaving unconventional sounds into lush scores, incorporated recordings of the actors' voices. Not their lines, but their breaths, their laughter, even their sighs between takes. These sounds were manipulated, layered, and stretched until they became part of the musical landscape. When I listen carefully to certain scenes, I almost feel I can hear those human traces beneath the orchestration, like ghosts hidden in the melody. It gives the score a strange intimacy, as though the film itself is breathing alongside us. Another uncanny occurrence happened during filming in an outdoor location. A meteor shower lit up the sky unexpectedly one night, visible even through the light pollution of the set. The crew stopped everything to watch. Later, some of that real cosmic display was subtly integrated into the background of the film. But more than that, the moment itself became mythologized among the team. They said it felt like the universe was acknowledging them, winking down at their attempt to tell a story about humanity and the stars. It may be nothing more than coincidence, but those are the coincidences that take root in memory, the kind that transform an ordinary shoot into something that feels touched by fate. And then there are the smallest, strangest details, the things you might miss entirely. Like how one of the props, a seemingly mundane object on a desk, actually contained a working mechanism designed by a watchmaker. Or how a background extra, visible for less than 3 seconds, was wearing a costume whose embroidery referenced a centuries-old astronomical chart. Or how the cinematographer, obsessed with natural light, adjusted shooting schedules, so scenes aligned with actual planetary movements. These are the kinds of eccentricities that most audiences will never know, but they thrum beneath the film like secret threads, weaving authenticity into the illusion. The more I think about it, the more I realize that these strange facts are not accidents. They are the fingerprints of people deeply immersed in their craft, pouring themselves into every frame. Strangeness, in this sense, is not chaos but devotion, the willingness to go too far, to obsess over details invisible to most, to surrender to coincidences that feel like signs. Perhaps that is why the film feels so alive, so uncanny in its resonance. It is not just a story told, but an experience lived, haunted by its own making. And isn't that, in some way, what art has always been? A space where reality bends, where strange coincidences gather, where the boundary between creation and life becomes porous. The strangeness behind the film is not just trivia. It is part of the story itself, reminding us that even fiction is tethered to the unpredictability of the world. There are films that wash over us like passing weather, pleasant, even moving, but gone by the time the credits finish rolling. And then there are films that linger, burrow, and demand a second look. This one belongs to the second kind. Its events are not just plot mechanics, not just devices to push characters from one point to another. They are layered, almost ritualistic moments, heavy with implication. To revisit them is to discover something like sediment at the bottom of a river, each layer carrying a history, a meaning, a hidden resonance that deepens the entire current. The opening event, if you recall, seems deceptively ordinary. A boy misunderstood, teased, swept into a situation that is both surreal and terrifying. On the surface, it is a straightforward setup, the kind you'd find in any narrative where an unlikely hero stumbles into destiny. But seen through a critical lens, the event functions on multiple levels. It is not just about abduction, it is about exposure, the sudden and unchosen visibility of a person who had lived comfortably in the margins. He does not step into the spotlight willingly. It seizes him, drags him forward, and in doing so mirrors something deeply human. The way life has a habit of pulling us into roles we neither sought nor believed we were capable of inhabiting. This is where critics have often paused, asking, is this event allegorical? Does it gesture toward the way society thrusts expectations onto those least prepared, or perhaps toward the ancient archetype of the reluctant prophet? For me, the resonance lies in that universal sense of being chosen, not out of desire, but out of inevitability. The first major event is not about a spaceship or an alien council. It is about the terrifying moment when the world suddenly sees you, when anonymity crumbles. The subsequent events unfold with a kind of dreamlike inevitability. The boy is ushered into the heart of an alien tribunal, a chamber filled with eyes, literal, metaphorical, symbolic. From a critical perspective, this tribunal scene is almost theatrical in its construction. The council becomes less a group of characters and more a chorus, echoing the long tradition of Greek drama. They question, they accuse, they demand clarity, and in doing so they represent not individuals but forces, doubt, authority, fear of the unknown. When the boy stumbles, trying to explain himself, critics often read this as a reflection of how any voice trembles when first exposed to power. And yet, within the trembling lies the film's genius. It allows silence, hesitation, and awkwardness to carry as much weight as polished speeches. In an era of cinema where protagonists often respond with witty quips or sudden, polished courage, here we witness faltering, raw uncertainty. To me, that choice is nothing short of radical. It tells us that authenticity, even in its roughest form, can disrupt authority more profoundly than any rehearsed performance. The film's middle arc deepens this theme. Events that, on the surface, resemble science fiction spectacle. Alien ceremonies, dazzling landscapes, confrontations with strange beings, are, when stripped of their visual grandeur, studies in vulnerability. One key event comes when the boy, after being mocked, suddenly chooses to speak not from strategy, but from an honest burst of frustration and longing. He tells the tribunal something utterly simple, that he never asked to be here, that he feels small, scared, and unworthy. Critics have described this moment as one of the most quietly subversive in the film. Instead of valorizing bravery as stoicism or silence, the story valorizes bravery as admission, as the courage to be fragile in front of an audience that could annihilate him. When I watched that moment, I felt something stir uncomfortably inside me. It reminded me of childhood, of those moments when I was pushed in front of a class, unprepared, my voice shaking, cheeks burning. How I longed to vanish, and yet, how sometimes those trembling confessions landed more honestly than anything rehearsed. The event works because it is not a spectacle of strength, but a spectacle of weakness transformed into strength. And in that inversion lies much of the film's critical power. As the narrative unfolds, a series of key events complicates the relationship between the boy and the alien world. One might think the story pivots around battles or external conflicts, but in truth, its most critical events are dialogues, moments of recognition, misrecognition, misunderstanding. The tribunal does not test him with weapons, but with words, with paradoxes, with riddles of morality and selfhood. Each question is less about the boy's knowledge, and more about his ability to reveal himself. From a critical perspective, these dialogues function as mirrors. The aliens are not simply others. They are the distilled projection of the boy's inner fears and doubts. When they accuse him of lying, it reflects his own fear that he cannot live up to the role imposed on him. When they mock his youth, it reflects his own shame about being underestimated, about being perpetually not enough. Thus, every event is doubled. Once in the external world of the plot, and once in the internal landscape of the character. This doubling is what gives the film its layered literary texture. It invites us not just to watch, but to interpret. One of the most fascinating critical perspectives arises from the film's climactic turn. At first, it seems as though the tribunal is preparing to condemn him, to cast judgment. The tension builds, the music swells, the atmosphere grows heavy. Then, in a twist, they reveal that their scrutiny was never about punishment, but about recognition. They were not measuring his answers, but his authenticity. They were testing whether a human could speak truthfully, vulnerably, without artifice. This twist, while surprising in plot terms, is even more potent thematically. It reframes everything. The boy was never on trial for his mistakes. He was on trial for his humanity. The emotional resonance of this event cannot be overstated. When he finally realizes that he has passed not by pretending to be something greater, but by being exactly who he is, we as viewers are forced to reflect on our own lives. How often do we exhaust ourselves trying to present the version of ourselves we believe will be accepted, admired, chosen? How often do we forget that what truly connects us to others is our unpolished truth? Critics have written at length about this twist, some describing it as sentimental, others as profound. For me, its power lies in its simplicity, the radical idea that to be human is not to conquer, but to confess. Yet even beyond the twist, there is the matter of the resolution. The boy is not crowned a hero in the conventional sense. He is not given medals, nor does he return triumphant with fanfare. Instead, he is offered something quieter: acknowledgement, belonging, a place among those who once doubted him. It is a resolution that resists the easy closure of victory and instead gestures toward continuity. Life will go on. Challenges will continue. But he will no longer face them unseen. Critically, this choice alters the entire impact of the film. It leaves us not with adrenaline, but with reflection, not with spectacle, but with resonance. And perhaps that is why the film has drawn such intellectual attention. It resists the very narrative patterns we expect of its genre. Instead of escape, it gives us intimacy. Instead of conquest, it gives us confession. Instead of triumph, it gives us truth. The thematic resonance stretches further when considered alongside the cultural moment in which the film was released. Audiences in our era, weary of polished facades and curated personas, seem hungry for authenticity. The boy's trembling honesty becomes a metaphor for what so many of us yearn for. A world where vulnerability is not weakness but strength, where speaking one's truth is enough to earn recognition. Critics have noted that this cultural hunger is what gave the film its unexpected power. It was not just entertainment, it was catharsis. Looking back on the major events, what strikes me most is how carefully they were constructed, not only for narrative tension, but for symbolic depth. Every event is both literal and metaphorical. Every twist serves not just the plot, but the theme. That is what makes the story resonate with those who approach film as literature. It is layered, self-aware, alive with metaphor. To me, the film's events read almost like a parable, though not one with a single, neat moral. Instead, it is a parable about being seen, about how authenticity disarms authority, about how humanity's greatest strength may lie not in its inventions or victories, but in its honesty. That is the thread that binds the narrative together, the through line that makes each event more than spectacle. And perhaps that is why, long after the credits rolled, I found myself turning these moments over in my mind. Not the special effects, not the design of the aliens, not even the dramatic score, but the trembling of a boy's voice, the silence after his confession, the twist that reframed judgment as recognition. These are the events that matter, because they are the ones that echo into our own lives. They remind us of classrooms, of boardrooms, of friendships, of moments where we too felt on trial. They remind us that the greatest victory may not be to perform flawlessly, but to show ourselves honestly, even when our voices shake. In the end, the film's impact and reception cannot be separated from these critical perspectives. It is not simply that the events were surprising or moving. It is that they tapped into something collective, something quietly universal. They offered a mirror, and in that mirror, audiences saw themselves. That is why the film lingers, why critics dissect it, why viewers return to it. Not because it dazzled us, but because it dared to show us trembling, flawed, authentic humanity, and told us that was enough. I've always believed that a film has two lives. The one the audience sees, neatly polished on the big screen, and the secret, untamed life it lived while being created. The former is clean, deliberate, tightly woven. The latter is chaotic, messy, often hilarious, sometimes heartbreaking. What fascinates me most are those behind-the-scenes fragments. The unscripted moments, the quirks of the filmmaking process, the human fingerprints smudged onto the machinery of cinema. And with this film, there are so many of those stories. Production began with a kind of quiet uncertainty. From the outside, it looked like a smooth, carefully planned project. The studio had its schedule, the director had their vision, and the cast seemed ready to dive in. But peel back that surface, and you'd find a team stepping onto uncharted ground. This wasn't just another movie. It was one of those ambitious works where everything had to be built almost from scratch. New technology, new set designs, new narrative structures. One crew member joked that they weren't just making a film. They were building a spaceship in the dark and hoping it flies. And that's not entirely a metaphor. Much of the set was practical, not digital, because the director had this stubborn belief that real walls, real corridors, real chambers gave actors something to touch, something to lean on, something to ground their emotions. That decision meant months of labor for the design team, who constructed enormous alien tribunal halls and otherworldly landscapes inside cavernous soundstages. The sheer scale of it surprised even the crew. One gaffer described walking onto set the first day and feeling like he had stepped into a cathedral built by beings who did not share human proportions. Fun fact: those towering alien council seats, which look seamless and monumental on screen, were actually constructed in detachable segments that had to be wheeled in and bolted together like puzzle pieces. During filming, one of them wobbled unexpectedly, and the poor actor seated there had to sit perfectly still for fear of toppling the entire structure. Later, the production designer joked that the seat had more personality than some of the cast. What I find endlessly charming about this process is how deeply collaborative it became. Film sets can sometimes feel hierarchical, with directors shouting, assistants scrambling, actors in their own bubbles. But here, stories from the crew tell of a strangely communal spirit. The lead actor, despite carrying the narrative's emotional weight, spent off-camera time playing card games with the set builders. Extras were invited to eat alongside the main cast instead of being herded into a separate tent. Someone described it less as a Hollywood set and more like a traveling circus. Everyone different, everyone essential, everyone bound by the fragile miracle they were trying to pull off. Of course, not everything went smoothly. One memorable challenge came during the tribunal sequences, which required dozens of performers in elaborate prosthetics. The makeup team worked grueling hours, sometimes beginning at 2 a.m. to prepare everyone in time for an 8 o'clock shoot. There's a now famous anecdote about a performer who fell asleep in his alien mask during lunch break. When he woke up, the prosthetics had shifted slightly, giving him an unintended but hilarious lopsided expression. Instead of fixing it immediately, the director insisted they shoot with it, claiming it gave the alien a touch of eccentricity. Audiences who spot the off-kilter expression often assume it's a deliberate choice, never realizing it came from an accidental nap. Technology also played its part in shaping the film's quirks. While many films lean heavily on digital effects, the director was adamant about blending practical sets with CGI only when absolutely necessary. That philosophy led to some ingenious hybrid solutions. For example, in scenes where alien landscapes stretch far beyond what was physically built, the visual effects team extended the sets digitally, but only after consulting with the lighting crew to ensure shadows and glows matched the practical lamps and fixtures on stage. The result is a seamless integration where even seasoned viewers struggle to distinguish what is real from what is rendered. Another fun behind-the-scenes fact: the Alien Council's language, those strange, guttural syllables interspersed with melodic tones, wasn't random gibberish. The filmmakers hired a linguist to develop a consistent grammar and vocabulary, complete with rules for tense, syntax, and metaphor. Most of it never appears in the film, but the actors portraying council members received little dictionaries and pronunciation guides. Some took to it so enthusiastically that they began conversing in the alien language during breaks, confusing the catering staff to no end. Then there was the challenge of working with the young lead. Child actors often present a unique set of production concerns. Shorter working hours, the need for guardians on set, and the delicate balance of directing while preserving spontaneity. What surprised everyone, though, was how naturally the boy slipped into the role. Crew members described him as having an uncanny instinct for emotional timing, as if he could sense the rhythm of a scene without overthinking it. That instinct, however, sometimes led to unpredictability. On one occasion, he improvised a line that wasn't in the script, a raw, frustrated outburst that caught even the seasoned actors off guard. The director kept the take, calling it the truest moment in the film. To this day, fans debate whether that line was scripted, unaware it was born entirely from a child's sudden spark. Weather also had its say in shaping production. Though much was shot on controlled stages, several key sequences were filmed outdoors, and nature seemed determined to test the crew. One storm in particular forced the team to shut down for 3 days, during which cast and crew found themselves stranded together in a small town. Rather than sulk, they turned the delay into an impromptu retreat. Late-night karaoke, shared meals, and even a bizarre talent show that featured everything from juggling to poetry readings. By the time they returned to set, the bond between them had grown so strong that you can almost sense it in the way they interact on screen. And then there are the tiny, easily missed details. The ones I adore because they remind us how even the smallest choices ripple outward. The sound design, for instance, includes subtle echoes recorded inside actual caves and abandoned factories to give the alien tribunal hall a sense of scale. The costumes incorporate recycled fabrics, some sourced from thrift shops, because the designer wanted textures that felt lived in rather than fabricated. Even the lighting team experimented with tinted gels, hand-painted with streaks and imperfections, creating an otherworldly glow that no computer program could replicate. One particularly heartwarming anecdote involves the film's score. The composer, tasked with balancing grandeur and intimacy, invited the young lead to sit in on one of the recording sessions. Midway through, the boy shyly hummed a melody he had been making up during shooting breaks. The composer, inspired, wove that melody into one of the final tracks. Audiences may not recognize it, but that haunting, recurring theme carries the voice of the protagonist himself, layered into the very fabric of the music. To me, that's nothing short of poetic. The child's presence not just on screen, but in the heartbeat of the soundtrack. Of course, no production is free from accidents, and some of them became legendary among the crew. During one scene involving a levitating platform, the machinery malfunctioned, sending the platform tilting at an awkward angle. The actors, strapped in but startled, burst into laughter rather than panic, and the take was unusable, though the blooper reel, apparently, is priceless. In another case, a prop meant to glow ominously refused to light up, forcing the crew to improvise with handheld flashlights hidden off-camera. The director later admitted that the emergency solution actually looked better than the original design. Looking at all these stories together, what strikes me is how much of the film's final texture, its authenticity, its warmth, its sense of lived-in strangeness, came not from flawless planning but from imperfections, improvisations, and accidents embraced rather than hidden. The film feels human, not because everything went right, but because the team allowed the wrong turns to shape the path. And maybe that's the truest fun fact of all. Cinema is not control, it's surrender. It's a dance between vision and accident, between discipline and chaos. This film's production proves that over and over again. The wobbly throne, the improvised line, the storm that birthed a talent show, the nap that gave an alien a crooked smile, all of it lives invisibly within the polished story, whispering through the seams. Audiences may never know these details, but they feel them, in the same way we feel the warmth of a hand-knitted sweater compared to a machine-made one. The irregularities are what make it real. For me, learning these behind-the-scenes tales deepens the way I experience the film. It stops being just a narrative and becomes a living artifact, a collaboration not only between characters, but between dozens of craftspeople, each leaving their fingerprints behind. That's what makes cinema endlessly magical. Not just the story told, but the secret stories of how it came to be. What always fascinates me about the films that stick with us is not merely their stories, but the worlds they inhabit. The narrative may carry the plot, the dialogue may convey character, but it is the setting, the environments, the lighting, the textures, the air, that makes a story live inside us long after the credits roll. In this film, the settings are not just backdrops. They are silent participants, breathing alongside the characters, shaping the tension, the wonder, and the emotional resonance. From the opening scene, the filmmakers signal that place matters. The boy's home is deliberately ordinary, grounded, almost banal in its realism. It could be any suburban neighborhood, yet small, telling details. The worn linoleum in the kitchen, the slight squeak of a stair step, the soft, golden glow of late afternoon sunlight through lace curtains, root us firmly in his world. The setting's intimacy immediately tells us something about him. He is familiar, constrained, cocooned. The contrast between this grounding and the extraordinary journey he will be thrust into is striking. By beginning with the ordinary, the film allows us to feel the weight of what is coming, the strangeness that will infiltrate a life once entirely mundane. When he first encounters the alien tribunal, the shift is profound. The chamber is vast, cavernous, almost cathedral-like, with ceilings that vanish into darkness, walls etched with faint, alien symbols, and a floor that seems to ripple with light. Critics often note the subtle interplay between scale and perspective here. The boy feels physically small, dwarfed by the environment, and yet he is emotionally magnified. The cinematography accentuates this feeling, with long, low-angle shots that frame him against impossibly tall figures. The camera lingers, deliberately, allowing us to feel the awe, the intimidation, the vertigo of standing in a world so different yet, in its formal patterns, deeply logical. The use of lighting throughout the tribunal is particularly remarkable. It is neither entirely natural nor entirely synthetic. It exists somewhere in between, casting soft shadows that seem almost conscious, hinting at presence beyond what the eye can detect. Color temperature shifts subtly with the narrative beats. Warm tones during moments of emotional honesty, cold blues and purples when the boy is being tested or confronted. These choices are not flashy. They are almost imperceptible, yet they manipulate our subconscious responses. We feel tension, relief, hope, or fear before the characters even speak. It is a cinematic vocabulary in which color, shadow, and light convey as much meaning as dialogue. Outdoor sequences offer another layer of setting complexity. Several pivotal moments occur in alien landscapes, places that are clearly designed, yet borrow heavily from natural phenomena. Jagged rock formations sculpted to look otherworldly, bioluminescent flora inspired by deep-sea organisms, and skies layered in gradients of impossible colors. The filmmakers blended practical effects with subtle CGI to ensure that the environments felt tangible. Actors describe walking on these sets as disorienting. They could feel the textures underfoot, smell the dampness of simulated moss, and yet see horizons that could not exist on Earth. This tactile realism grounds the fantastical elements in something our minds accept as real, increasing immersion. One of my favorite details involves the tribunal chamber again, but this time in the realm of texture. The walls were covered with panels designed to subtly shift color as the story progressed, controlled by hidden lighting arrays. During one emotionally charged moment, the walls pulsed almost imperceptibly with red and gold hues, amplifying the intensity without the audience consciously noticing. A cinematographer on set later described it as the environment breathing with the characters, a phrase that has stuck with me because it perfectly encapsulates the film's approach to setting. Nothing exists independently. Everything is in dialogue. There is also the clever use of scale throughout. The boy is small, the council figure's enormous, the hall immense, and yet corridors twist in ways that make them feel longer or shorter depending on narrative need. This manipulation of space is subtle but brilliant. The camera's lens choice, the careful positioning of actors, and even the angle of light all contribute to a sense of unease or wonder, guiding audience emotions without a single line of exposition. In a particularly tense scene, a corridor seems to stretch endlessly ahead, filled with shadows that seem almost to move on their own. The cinematography accentuates perspective in a way that makes the environment feel alive, almost sentient. In contrast, the more intimate locations, bedrooms, hidden alcoves, or small spacecraft interiors, are meticulously detailed to feel lived in. Props are chosen for realism. Buttons worn from use, panels slightly scratched, personal objects that hint at history. Even when the environment is futuristic, these details anchor the viewer, creating a balance between alien spectacle and human relatability. There is a warmth in these spaces, a sense that they exist beyond their narrative function, that life inhabits them even when no camera captures it. Movement through these spaces is carefully choreographed. The director often employs tracking shots, gliding alongside the boy as he explores unfamiliar territory, to give us the impression of discovery. In contrast, static wide shots allow the audience to take in the majesty of the alien architecture or the enormity of the tribunal. These choices are deliberate, almost literary. The camera's movement mirrors the character's emotional journey. In moments of fear, the camera keeps its distance, letting isolation be palpable. In moments of intimacy, it moves closer, drawing us into confession, breath, and subtle expression. Sound design complements the settings with astonishing subtlety. Rooms are filled with echoes or absences thereof, creating a tactile sense of space. Metallic corridors hum faintly. Alien chambers exhale low, resonant vibrations. Outdoor landscapes carry winds that shift unnaturally, suggesting worlds beyond our own physics. These sonic cues make the environments feel real, immersive, and sometimes disquieting. The audience experiences the space almost bodily, sensing its dimensions, textures, and mood through both sight and sound. One of the more fascinating choices was the way certain locations reflected the boy's internal state. The tribunal chamber, initially imposing and alien, subtly shifts as he gains confidence. Shadows recede, light pools differently, colors warm during honest confession. Similarly, spaces that once seemed hostile become more welcoming, mirroring his growing understanding of this alien culture. The filmmakers are not merely telling the story through plot. They are encoding the character's emotional arc directly into the physical world. It is a visual metaphor rendered in 3 dimensions, and the effect is almost subliminal, felt rather than consciously processed. The interplay of practical sets and visual effects is also worth noting. Exterior landscapes often blend matte paintings with physical props. Jagged peaks and alien flora exist both in real textures and in extended digital vistas. This hybrid approach allows actors to interact with real objects while expanding the scale and wonder of the environment digitally. The cinematographer described it as a dance between reality and imagination, a careful balance where neither dominates. The result is a world that is astonishingly believable, where even the most fantastical elements carry the weight of reality. Interior settings likewise benefit from unusual perspectives. Narrow stairwells and hidden alcoves are often shot at slightly skewed angles, creating tension and disorientation. This subtle manipulation of geometry mirrors the narrative uncertainty. The boy is in a world that obeys some rules but defies others, and the spaces themselves reinforce that psychological effect. Shadows are used like actors, shifting subtly across walls to emphasize suspicion, doubt, or revelation. Even a seemingly simple hallway becomes an expressive tool, narrating emotional beats without dialogue. Color palette choices are a continuous narrative device. Early scenes, grounded in the human world, favor warm, comforting tones. Soft yellows, gentle browns, muted greens. As the boy enters alien environments, the palette shifts. Deep purples, iridescent blues, and metallic silvers dominate, creating a sense of wonder and unease simultaneously. These transitions are gradual, so the viewer moves seamlessly from familiar to extraordinary, experiencing the same awe and uncertainty as the protagonist. Finally, the cinematography's relationship with setting is crucial. Long lenses compress space, giving alien chambers an oppressive weight. Wide lenses expand landscapes, instilling awe. Handheld shots capture vulnerability and immediacy, especially in quieter, intimate moments. Even framing choices, placing characters at the edge of the frame, or behind partially obscuring set elements, reinforce narrative tension and thematic resonance. In many ways, the visual grammar of the film is inseparable from its story. The settings are not just passive, they speak, react, and even challenge the characters. The culmination of all these choices, sets, lighting, color, camera work, sound, and design, creates an immersive cinematic language that conveys story, emotion, and theme simultaneously. Audiences may leave the theater recalling dazzling visuals, but the subtle manipulations of space, light, and color are what linger in memory. We remember the feeling of awe, isolation, discovery, and intimacy long after the images fade. Film sets are strange ecosystems, alive with chaos and collaboration, friction and laughter, exhaustion and exhilaration. Few people outside the industry grasp how much of a movie's magic is born not from scripting or planning, but from improvisation, serendipity, and the small, human moments that happen between takes. In reflecting on the production of Elio 2025, I've come to realize that the story behind the story is almost as captivating as the one that unfolds on screen. And so, the first thing to understand is that this film's set was not just a workplace. It was a living organism, with personalities, rhythms, and moods of its own. The lead actor, a young boy with uncanny emotional intelligence, was immediately at the heart of this ecosystem. On the surface, he seemed reserved, careful, almost precociously mature. But beneath that quiet exterior, he was endlessly curious and mischievous in ways that kept everyone on their toes. There's a story that perfectly captures this. During one rehearsal, he wandered off from the planned blocking and began exploring the set corridors, muttering lines under his breath, as if he were composing his own dialogue. The director could have reacted with frustration, but instead, they followed him with a camera, letting the boy's spontaneous exploration guide the shot. What resulted was a scene of raw vulnerability and discovery that never would have existed on paper. The production crew later joked that the boy had directed more scenes than the director. The Alien Tribunal set was a constant source of both awe and challenge. Constructed from enormous panels, some stretching over 20 feet high, it required a massive team to assemble, move, and maintain. Lighting, camera positioning, and even the actor's movement had to be meticulously coordinated, because a misaligned panel could cast unintended shadows or obscure a critical facial expression. Yet, for all its grandeur, the set often became a playground. Crew members would share coffee in the shadows of the massive throne-like chairs, and occasionally, someone would playfully hide a small prop, a stuffed alien toy, a faux artifact, knowing that the young actor would find it and respond in an unrehearsed, charming way that might even be incorporated into the scene. One particularly memorable challenge involved the levitation sequences. Certain moments required actors to appear as though they were suspended mid-air, a combination of harnesses, wires, and green screen effects. The technical demands were exhausting. Safety checks, harness fittings, and constant communication between rigging, camera, and performance teams. But the humorous side of these sequences often leaked into the set. There was a day when a crew member miscalibrated the rig, and the boy floated slightly sideways, his expression one of comical surprise. Laughter rippled through the crew, and though the take was technically unusable, everyone recalled it fondly, insisting that the spirit of that moment carried through to the final film. Interactions among the cast were just as important as the technical challenges. The alien performers, many of whom spent hours in prosthetics and makeup, formed close bonds with the human actors. During long waits while prosthetics were applied, they shared stories, jokes, and even impromptu lessons about movement and posture in the alien world. One actor recalled a moment when a prosthetic mask had to be completely remade, which would have delayed filming by hours. The young lead sat beside the makeup artist, offering encouragement and joking about the alien fashion show, turning what could have been a stressful situation into a moment of levity. These small acts of camaraderie became invisible glue, holding together the energy and morale of a long, grueling shoot. Weather, too, played its role in shaping behind-the-scenes dynamics. Though much of the film was shot on controlled sets, certain exterior sequences were filmed in remote, breathtaking locations. One such day, a sudden downpour threatened to cancel a critical shoot. But instead of frustration, the crew responded with ingenuity and humor. Plastic coverings were rigged for cameras, tarps became makeshift shelters, and cast members improvised lines while soaked, their laughter echoing through the rain. The director later reflected that the scene carried an unexpected vitality precisely because of the weather, capturing a spontaneity and energy that no controlled studio environment could replicate. Even the sound department contributed to memorable behind-the-scenes stories. Certain sequences demanded subtle, almost imperceptible ambient sounds, like the hum of alien machinery or the echoing footsteps in cavernous chambers. The sound team often experimented in unconventional ways, recording the creak of old doors, scraping metal, and even water dripping in abandoned factories. At times, crew members were caught trying to capture perfect echoes in empty stairwells late at night, producing comical scenes of grown adults whispering, running, or dropping objects repeatedly. Yet those eccentric efforts paid off, giving the film its immersive, tactile oral texture. The production design team deserves special mention, not just for technical brilliance, but for the unexpected stories that emerged from their meticulous attention to detail. Every prop, every texture, every color was chosen to enhance authenticity. Yet sometimes, this attention led to accidental moments of delight. One day, a small prop meant to be a mundane tool in the alien council chamber was placed slightly off-center. During rehearsal, the young actor picked it up, misinterpreted its purpose, and improvised an entire line around it. The director loved the spontaneity and asked them to keep it in the final cut. That tiny adjustment, invisible to most viewers, became a signature moment that critics later praised as perfectly capturing the boys' mixture of innocence and curiosity. Makeup and costume departments also have stories that border on legend. The prosthetic alien masks could take upwards of 4 hours to apply, and actors often had to sit still for long periods in stifling heat. Yet these constraints bred creativity. On long waits, performers began to create elaborate gestures, movements, and even silent conversations with one another to convey personality without speaking. The director, observing these improvisations, incorporated many subtle motions into the film, giving the alien characters a richness and depth that might have been impossible to script. One makeup artist confessed that watching the performers inhabit their alien forms was like watching puppets gain souls. Another fascinating anecdote involves the day when a camera malfunctioned mid-shoot, halting a crucial sequence. Instead of abandoning the take, the crew rallied, improvising with mirrors and reflective surfaces to capture alternate angles while repairs were underway. This ingenuity not only saved time, but also led to a visually striking composition that the filmmakers later deemed superior to the original plan. Moments like these reveal how unpredictability can catalyze creativity, and how behind-the-scenes problem-solving can subtly shape the artistic result. Food, too, became a surprisingly memorable aspect of the set. Long shooting days in remote locations meant that catering crews were essential to maintaining morale. Yet the interactions around meals often became small, bonding rituals. Cast and crew shared stories, jokes, and quiet reflections on the scenes they were filming. One night, a small group stayed behind to rehearse lines over a late dinner, accidentally creating a private moment of character development that influenced how certain scenes were shot. In the mundane rhythm of food preparation and sharing, the human connection necessary for authentic performance was nurtured. Even the smallest production quirks contributed to a sense of intimacy and fun. For instance, one prop alien communicator, meant to light up and flash subtly, occasionally blinked at random due to a wiring issue. Rather than fixing it immediately, the director encouraged the actors to interact with it as if it had a mind of its own. That small, unpredictable detail became a recurring joke on set, and even enhanced the narrative tension, showing how embracing imperfections can enrich storytelling. Scheduling and logistics were another source of challenge and ingenuity. Coordinating actors, crew, and complex equipment for extended sequences required precision and flexibility. One particularly ambitious night shoot involved multiple moving platforms, intricate lighting cues, and simultaneous sound recording. The director recalled moments when everything seemed on the brink of chaos, yet through teamwork and calm improvisation, the scene was completed beautifully. Crew members often remarked that these high-pressure nights, though exhausting, generated a unique camaraderie and collective adrenaline, binding the team together in a way that is rare in professional environments. Perhaps most striking is the emotional investment of everyone involved. Scenes that appear effortless on screen often required dozens of takes, adjustments, and careful coaching. Yet the shared commitment to storytelling and the belief in the narrative's power kept morale high, even when faced with technical setbacks, long hours, or physically demanding stunts. Anecdotes abound of actors consoling one another after emotional scenes, of grip and lighting crew taking turns holding reflective boards for hours in extreme temperatures, and of production assistants improvising solutions to problems no one else had anticipated. These human stories, woven into the creation of the film, breathe life into every frame. And then there is the way laughter punctuated the tension. Comedy and mischief on set often emerged spontaneously. One day, during a rehearsal of a particularly serious tribunal scene, a crew member accidentally triggered a small mechanical device meant for another scene. The unexpected noise caused the young actor to break character with an irrepressible giggle. Laughter rippled through the set, breaking the tension, and when filming resumed, the actors carried a warmth and natural rhythm into their performances that some say could not have been captured otherwise. In reflecting on all these moments, the lesson becomes clear. The behind-the-scenes stories are not just anecdotal curiosities. They are the hidden scaffolding of the film's emotional and aesthetic architecture. Each improvisation, each shared joke, each challenge overcome contributes to a subtle alchemy, turning labor and chaos into art. The humor, dedication, ingenuity, and camaraderie are inseparable from the story itself. The audience may never see the cables, props, or whispered jokes, but the spirit of those moments animates every frame, every glance, every heartbeat on screen. In the end, the production of Elio 2025 was less about executing a pre-written plan and more about co-creating a living, breathing universe. Every challenge overcame, every spontaneous act, every small human interaction layered texture, depth, and authenticity into the finished film. Behind the camera, in the hidden corridors of the set, in the laughter, sweat, and creativity of the crew, the story was born in ways that are subtle, powerful, and unforgettable. These behind-the-scenes insights are a reminder that cinema is a profoundly human endeavor, not merely the product of a director's vision, but of the countless invisible acts of ingenuity, care, and imagination that happen every day on set. When I think about what makes a story linger, it's rarely the plot alone. It's the ideas that pulse beneath the surface, the unseen threads that give meaning to every choice a character makes, every shadow in a scene, every camera angle. With Elio 2025, the richness of the film lies not just in its fantastical narrative, but in the depth of its thematic resonance and the subtle yet powerful symbolism threaded throughout. From the very beginning, the film establishes a tension between isolation and connection. Elio, the young protagonist, inhabits a world that is at once familiar and alien. His home, small and ordinary, represents comfort but also confinement. There's a gentle melancholy in these early shots. The warm, golden hues of his room and the careful placement of personal items suggest a life lived in quiet reflection. But the spaces also feel constrained, like a garden fenced in too tightly. This visual motif mirrors the theme of isolation, not merely physical, but emotional. He is surrounded by life, yet fundamentally apart, a motif that recurs throughout the film. The alien tribunal, in stark contrast, embodies both the unknown and the infinite potential of discovery. Its towering architecture, vast chambers, and shimmering symbols speak to the theme of transcendence. The idea that understanding and growth require confronting spaces larger than ourselves. In many ways, the tribunal is not merely a setting, but a living symbol of the universe's moral and existential weight. The directors use this environment to explore what it means to face judgment, responsibility, and the consequences of choice, all of which resonate deeply with the human experience. One of the central themes that threads through every scene is the negotiation between innocence and wisdom. Elio is young, naive in some ways, yet remarkably perceptive in others. His journey is about navigating complexity, moral, emotional, and philosophical. The symbolism of light and shadow reinforces this tension. Moments of revelation are often bathed in soft, glowing light, while moments of doubt, fear, or confrontation are layered with shadow, suggesting both literal and metaphorical obscurity. Shadows, in particular, are used not just for mood, but as a reflection of Elio's inner state, shifting and stretching in tandem with his evolving understanding of the world. Connection and empathy are recurring thematic pillars. Throughout the film, gestures, small acts of kindness, and shared understanding carry more weight than grandiose speeches or overt displays of power. The filmmakers employ symbolic motifs, recurring patterns, shared objects, and echoed phrases to reinforce this. A small, unassuming artifact in the tribunal chamber, for instance, becomes a symbol of trust and memory, appearing in multiple contexts and linking characters across space and time. It reminds viewers that meaning is often constructed from small, repeated interactions rather than singular, monumental events. Another powerful theme is the tension between order and chaos. The tribunal, with its rigid hierarchies and formal procedures, symbolizes structure and authority. Yet, throughout the film, unexpected events, mistakes, improvisations, emotional ruptures, disrupt that order, creating narrative and visual tension. This dynamic is echoed in cinematographic choices. Symmetrical shots convey stability, while off-kilter angles, sudden cuts, or tilting perspectives suggest unpredictability. The constant interplay between control and spontaneity underscores the philosophical question the film poses. Can order truly exist without acknowledgement of chaos, and can growth emerge without disruption? Identity and self-discovery form another core thematic layer. Elio's journey is not just about navigating external challenges, but also internal landscapes. Symbolic mirrors, reflective surfaces, and recurring water motifs appear throughout key sequences. In these moments, the film visually externalizes introspection. Reflections are rarely literal. They fracture, ripple, and distort, visually encoding the idea that understanding oneself is complex, multifaceted, and sometimes disorienting. Water, meanwhile, often represents emotional depth and transformation. A scene in which Elio gazes into a shimmering pool mirrors the tribunal's own reflective surfaces, subtly linking personal insight with cosmic understanding. Trust and betrayal are intricately interwoven in both theme and symbolism. Characters who initially appear adversarial reveal hidden layers, and alliances shift unpredictably. This dynamic is mirrored visually. Set pieces and props often suggest duality. A door may appear closed yet be transparent. A glowing panel may reveal an unexpected symbol. A corridor may twist back on itself, reflecting both literal and metaphorical ambiguity. Symbolism is never overt. It exists to reward attentive viewers, to suggest rather than declare, deepening the resonance of every narrative twist. Family and chosen bonds are another recurring motif. Elio's relationships, both biological and formed through shared experience, underscore the importance of connection in the midst of overwhelming difference. The filmmakers subtly encode this theme in spatial composition. Characters placed in close proximity, sharing visual alignment, suggest unity. Those separated by obstacles or shadowed space evoke alienation or conflict. Even the choice of props reinforces relationships. Objects that pass between characters become markers of trust, memory, and shared purpose. These recurring symbols tie individual moments into a coherent emotional architecture. One of the more nuanced thematic threads is the interplay between knowledge and innocence. Elio's journey is framed as both educational and ethical. He learns facts about alien culture, moral frameworks, and cosmic consequences, but these lessons are inseparable from experience. The film never presents knowledge as purely intellectual. It is embodied, felt, and lived. Symbolic devices, books, holographic projections, encoded artifacts, represent not merely information but the responsibilities that accompany understanding. The act of learning is inherently moral, suggesting that awareness carries both privilege and obligation. The motif of thresholds recurs repeatedly, both literally and metaphorically. Doorways, gates, staircases, and platforms signify moments of decision and transition. Crossing a threshold often coincides with a moral or emotional turning point, reflecting the film's concern with choice and consequence. Cinematography amplifies this. Tight framing around a doorway can evoke apprehension. Wide-angle shots reveal risk or opportunity, and shifting light emphasizes the tension of movement from one state to another. These visual cues intertwine seamlessly with thematic development, making the viewer feel the weight of decisions alongside Elio. A fascinating symbolic element is the use of color as narrative signifier. Early scenes feature warm, grounded tones, golds, soft browns, gentle sunlight, representing safety, familiarity.